Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Toronto Community Benefit Network's 6th and final webinar focused on community benefits, working with municipalities, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. We're delighted that you've chosen to spend the next hour or so with us, and I'm pretty confident that our speakers are going to provide you with some thought-provoking insights. So before I go any further, my name is Linda Peake. I'm the director of the City Institute at York University here in Toronto, and I'm also a professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York. At the City Institute, we engage primarily in urban-based research. We have a global reputation of excellence for our research, which takes place not only in the GTA, but in many cities in North America, Europe, and the Global South. Our researchers have engaged in the development of urban theory, as well as in urban planning and policy relating to suburbanization, to immigration, urban governance, the in-between city, smart cities, urban politics, cities and pandemics, and cities in the climate crisis. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is the first global goal on cities. And we also work on a range of topics related to poverty and urban social change. Academic excellence is important to us, but so is knowledge dissemination. And the Institute also engages the public through seminar talks, workshops, and conferences, such as this meeting here today. Many of our researchers engage in community activism and alongside civil society groups, as well as planners and policymakers. And we reach out not only to faculty members, but also to graduate and undergraduate students, and we offer an annual graduate student professional training program. And you can join our listserv or look at our website, and I'll put that information in the chat for you. But let me turn now to our land acknowledgement. As this webinar is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same place, I recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. If this is the case, can you please acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders? The Toronto Community Benefits Network would like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Indeed, Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also acknowledge the many broken promises and treaties and the need to work towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of Turtle Island, both in the present and for future generations. Let's also acknowledge that the fight for community benefits builds on well-established practices with similar goals and principles, including over 300 privately negotiable enforceable agreements between Indigenous communities and developers, known as impact benefit agreements. We're all treaty people. Indeed, up till 1961, over a half of all Black people in Canada were Indigenous to Canada. And many of us here tonight came here as settlers or immigrants, as newcomers in this generation or generations past. We'd also like to acknowledge that those who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the event co-sponsors, the Canadian Urban Institute, York University's City Institute, the University of Toronto's School of Cities, City Build Ryerson, and the Atkinson Foundation. Thank you very much to our co-sponsors who have made this event possible. So why are we here to discuss community benefits? If we want to envision Toronto as an inclusive, thriving city in which all residents have equitable opportunities to contribute to healthy communities and a prospering economy, then we need to promote economic inclusion of all Toronto residents. the people who live in the areas in which infrastructure development is taking place. And it sometimes feels that when you're driving in Toronto, that every street you turn down is in a state of construction. But those residents should be given the opportunity to benefit from the wealth being generated. But the trickle-down theory of growth doesn't happen without political intervention. And one way in which the Toronto Community Benefits Network is ensuring that profits will trickle down to local residents and will ensure that equity and diversity, as well as inclusion, are taken into consideration in doing so, is by ensuring their direct engagement in the construction that's taking place in their city. That is, the Toronto Community Benefits Network brings together community partners, labour organisations, workforce development groups, government and industry representatives to work together to ensure that people building public infrastructure projects represent the demographics of the local communities where they are located and in ways that are non-exploitative. In this sense, these place-based struggles are struggles for human rights, because workers' rights are human rights. And they also speak to the right to the city, the right to use and occupy space as our collective right. I'm going to pass on to Rosemary Powell, who is going to convene today's session. But first of all, let me just cover a few housekeeping items. First of all, the webinar today is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the TCBN website for future use. So please feel free to promote the series, use it in classrooms and training sessions. We're hoping that it's going to become a living resource for people interested in building more inclusive economies and societies. There will be time for Q&A towards the end of today's event. So if you'd like to submit a question during the session, please enter it into the chat or Q&A feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, because everyone will be manually muted during today's event. So let me now turn over to the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefits Network, Rosemary Powell, who will act as a facilitator. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much for hosting us today and for your leadership and support to build a strong community benefits movement. Thanks for your powerful words about the need for equity, diversity, and inclusion in the construction industry and the need for political intervention to move this goal forward. Because like you said, our goal is to see that the rich diversity of our city is reflected in the workforce that is building infrastructure. So again, thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. We have a really great panel in front of us today. And you should know by now the reason that we decided to organize this webinar series was to raise the consciousness of all stakeholders in this important work for community benefits. And you know, we recognize that more needed to be done to ensure a just and inclusive society. At the time that we decided to do this, we recognized that billions of dollars were being poured into public infrastructure. And at the same time, we were in the middle of a social and economic crisis where the brunt of the burden was being placed on Black and racialized communities. Just in 2019 and 2020, early 2020, we had the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd and the consciousness raising that was happening around there. And not too long after, we found nooses on construction sites. And then all of a sudden we're in a pandemic. And the response to the pandemic also brought on additional burden onto our communities. And so we wanted to make sure that we spent the time to really have some meaningful conversations with leaders within the community benefits movement to discuss what it is that we need to do as a society, to move, and have change. And so very soon, Q2 2022, we're going to be going to the City of Toronto and asking for additional commitments for the community benefits framework that the city had already decided on last year. We want to see that there is firm targets set that will require contractors to use the community benefits approach to diversify the workforce. And here we are, it is Black History Month. All of these issues haven't gone away, but it does give us the opportunity to really reflect as a collective on our situation today. And we're having an event, a webinar. We want to invite everyone to participate. It's going to be next week, Thursday. It's a collaboration with Labor Community Services. And it's called Confronting Anti-Black Racism, Not an Occasional Act. And it'll be a rich panel of speakers that will be really delving deeply into the issues. So that's Thursday, February 17. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the speakers, and I will ask each of them to introduce themselves after I introduce them, and then we will all come together for a panel conversation. Today's webinar features panelists from Anchor Institutions in Toronto who will share more on its role in leading and implementing community benefits and social procurement strategies that strengthen local economies. And the speakers are Chesley Ditty. Chesley is the Vice President, Campus Development and Support Services of the West Park Healthcare Center. Chesley Alexander, Manager of the TTC's Racial Equity Office. Lorna Schwarzenberger, Associate Director for Access Programs and Community Engagement at York University. And Andrew Arifuzaman, Chief Administrative Officer at the University of Toronto's Scarborough campus. So let me introduce our first panelist, Chesley Ditty. Chesley currently oversees the design and construction of the West Park Healthcare Center's new hospital that will open in 2023. She has built her planning career in healthcare with extensive leadership experience in Ontario hospital redevelopment projects, including Holland Bloor View Kids Rehabilitation projects, including Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Breakrest. She is currently co-chair of the Community Benefits Working Group for the West Park Development Project. Chesley.
Hi, Rosemary. Thank you very much for this. And thank you for the invitation this evening to participate in this webinar. I think it's a really important message that we need to give, and looking at it from different perspectives is also going to be key. So hopefully we can do that tonight. What I will do, though, is just go through just a couple of slides to give you a quick overview of who is West Park and what our role is and our participation in terms of the community benefits agreement that we have on our project. So if I just go to the next slide, a little bit about West Park. We have been in existence for well over 100 years, and we actually started as a TB sanatorium. Over time, we've evolved, and we are now a rehabilitation and complex continuing care hospital with well over 1,000 staff and physicians, and probably importantly for some, because we're not always the easiest to find, we are actually at Jane and Eglinton. So for those of you who are aware, just behind the Eglinton Flats is our location. So, just in terms of this image's photo, given our respiratory background, we are now treating post-COVID patients. So that is the world we have been living in for the last 2 years, and West Park has continued to evolve and share our expertise around respiratory care in the treatment of these patients. So why are we involved in the community benefits realm? And if I can go to the next slide. As we've evolved, our needs have changed, and we needed to grow, and we are growing. So we're in the midst of a capital project. We're building a new hospital on our site, and you can see the size of it. We plan to open in 2023, and so this is, as Rosemary indicated, you know, we're all looking at, are we anchor organizations within our community? And we really do believe West Park is one of those. We are a significant employer. We have a role to play in terms of the healthcare system. So it's really important that we are a part of our community and our community is part of us. If I go to the next slide. So our community benefits program, we are actually the first Ontario hospital project to include a community benefits agreement. So it's a pilot project, and we're quite excited about being a part of that, because actually from a West Park perspective, we've been talking about community benefits since 2005. Again, understanding the needs that we have, and I think the role that we have to play in our neighborhood, because we are recognized as a priority neighborhood within Toronto. So we are a P3 project through Infrastructure Ontario, and along with the agreement or that type of project, we were able to embed a community benefits agreement within our project agreement with our contractor, who is Ellis Dawn. So Ellis Dawn, again, we work with as a partner within this project. And, you know, I think some of the things that we initiated right off the bat when we started this was we created a working group just around community benefits. And some of you may recognize, including Rosemary, who is on our working group and a really important member of our group, are basically overseeing and monitoring the community benefits agreement. So just on the next slide, and this is probably what is key, is our community benefits goal. So there is an aspirational target of 10% within our community benefits agreement. We strive to achieve it, and of course, you know, we always want to excel and exceed the target as best we can. I would say from a healthcare perspective or a hospital perspective, it is a learning in terms of the community benefits agreement, what we need to do, how we build those relationships, who do we need to work with, has really, I think, been an important part to date in terms of our learnings. And we really anticipate sharing those learnings with other hospital projects, and I can foresee that these will be embedded or built into future hospital capital projects. So again, we're new to this. We've learned a lot through TCBN and others, including those on the call, and we certainly want to continue to build those relationships and achieve our goal. So Rosemary, with that, I think I'll end here and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It's great to hear about the work that you're doing there, and we're looking forward to having a good conversation. All right, so the next person that will speak is Chesley Alexander. Chesley has worked for almost 25 years alongside marginalized groups to build more inclusive communities. Currently, he is the manager of the Racial Equity Office at the Toronto Transit Commission, where Chesley leads strategies to proactively identify, prevent, and address racism at the TTC, consult with internal and external stakeholders, and act as the spokesperson for the Racial Equity Unit in public committees and at all levels of government. Chesley.
Hi, can everybody see? I think I have my video on, but I'm not sure if everybody can see me. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening at the TTC, and I'm going to talk about it from a bit of a different perspective, and less about the opportunities in community benefits in terms of construction, and more on the operation side of the TTC. Right? So next slide, if you don't mind. Right? And I'll try to move fairly quickly. Right? So TTC is an old organization established in 1921. It's 100 years old, right? It was built at a time when Toronto looked a particular way, moved a particular way, acted and navigated a particular way, right? TTC is critical infrastructure. It touches every single neighborhood. There's not a neighborhood in the city of Toronto that the TTC does not run through. At the same time, it's an organization that's committed to sort of keeping up with the times and to grow and to change, right? There's work that we need to do. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Racial Equity Office. So my office was established. I'm new at the TTC. I've only been there for 6 months. Our office was established in the spring of 2021. We're meant to touch all areas of the organization, really to embed understandings and notions and practices and policies of equity and inclusion, but more specifically with an eye to confronting anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism at the TTC. We are meant to engage with communities, community partners and community stakeholders and the community at large, really to help guide us, to enlighten us, to show us the path really forward on our equity journey and our learnings. And lastly, the last thing I'll say is that we are currently collaborating quite closely with key areas. The TTC is massive, 16,000 staff, a number of different functional and operational areas. And so strategically, we've started doing some work with 4 particular areas with our enforcement units, or I guess we're not calling them enforcement units anymore, but our enforcement units with special constables and revenue protection, our talent management, our recruitment side, our procurement side, and our corporate and customer communications. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? How did I even get to the TTC? So a number of things happened. There are diversity and inclusion journey started in 2014 with internal report. It was mostly internal. It was mostly internal facing. Folks, like many organizations, focused on their existing staff and maybe even diversifying their staff. There was a shift with our outward facing understandings. There were reports in the Star that highlighted discrepancies in terms of how we dealt with and treated Black and Indigenous riders, right? Unfairly and disproportionately targeted through our special constable and revenue protection areas. And that's well documented, so I'm not speaking out of turn. And then there was an incident in 2018, or previously an incident in 2018, where a young man named Reese Maxwell Crawford got into a confrontation with a number of revenue protection or fair inspectors, and he was accosted, to put it lightly, by a number of these staff. From there's a number of reports and assessments that underpinned a few things, just how our equity gaps, our deficiencies in terms of how we understood how to navigate and treat people fairly, and our lack of policies and practices and procedures, and started to ground this, an understanding of how we must move forward. A number of recommendations were made. I'm only going to speak to the recommendations that are pertinent to what we're talking about today, and really around recruitment and procurement. So next slide, if you don't mind. Okay. So coming out of those various reports, the TTC made a number of commitments through two key plans, and then some orders that came out of our September 2021 board meeting, I believe, right? And these commitments, I'm only going to highlight the commitments here that speak very specifically, and they ran through all of our reports, but speak specifically to how we engage with community, how we recruit, the opportunities at the TTC to add benefit, real economic impact in communities through recruitment strategies, diversifying our staff, right? Currently, our staff are 16% of our staff are women, right? While 41% of our staff are racialized. As you move up in the organization, you don't see the same levels of diversity, right? And so we understand that there's work to do and developing pipelines to ensure that happens. Next slide, please. Right. So it's moving forward really quickly, right? We set a number of goals, largely around how we will diversify our staff, how we will engage different types of folks to land at the TTC, local folks to land at the TTC. And while I can touch on each sort of strategy or goal, really what I want to zero in on is our firmest commitment, which is to connect neighborhood improvement area and community partners who work in those areas to actual job opportunities at the TTC, and we are developing very solid and strategic pathways to land folks who live in neighborhood improvement areas, folks who are largely racialized, newcomers, woman-led families, young people, to full-time, unionized, pensionable jobs at the TTC. So next slide. Next slide, please. So what's the opportunity here at the TTC? The opportunity, there's two opportunities at the TTC, really. TTC has a commitment right now to ensure that 4 out of every 10 new hires are women at the TTC. As I said, right now, roughly 16% of our workforce are women in a city with 52% of us are women, right? So there's a very concerted effort to increase that number. In 2021, we exceeded that number of 4 in 10, which is pretty exciting. But this year, there's several hundred jobs, likely up to 1,000 jobs, operator jobs that pay between $55,000 and $75,000 a year, right? We have a commitment to have as many of those jobs as possible, up to 50% likely, going to folks who live in neighborhood improvement areas, right? If we were able to do that, if 50% of 1,000 jobs, right? If we were able to employ 500 people at $55,000 a year alone, salaries and benefits, that's a $35 million investment in neighborhoods year over year. At top of the scale at 75,000, that's a $40 million investment year over year. We're committed to working strategically with our partners, right? TCBN is one of the organizations that we've been engaging in conversations around how do we build a proper pathway to ensure that folks who are qualified, and qualified is you have a high school equivalency, you have your driver's license, and you have a clean driver's abstract, pretty much. That folks from neighborhood improvement areas that meet those 4 criteria have as solid an opportunity, or more than a solid opportunity, to land here at the TTC, so we can start to invest in different ways in communities. And while we may not have a community benefits agreement yet, something that we'll look to build toward, hopefully. And with that, I will say my goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chesley. What I really like about this panel today is that they're anchor institutions. It's not like they can pick up, shop and leave, right? And their license to operate really comes from the local community. Thank you, Chesley. Let's hear now from Lorna. Lorna is, I'm sorry, just 1 minute. Lorna is the Associate Director of Access Programs and Community Engagement in the Office of the Vice Provost, Academic at York University. Working on York's anchor framework since its inception in 2017, she coordinates implementation, community engagement, and strategic evolution of this work. Lorna. Lorna, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Lorna, we can hear you.
You can hear me, great. Can you see me?
I can't see you just yet.
I think we're coming. Are we there?
Yes, there you are.
Hello, Rosemary. Hello, and hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. And I'm happy to share what's happening at York in terms of our work in actualizing our anchor York U framework and our commitment to ensuring that there are community benefits implemented in the many practices that we have, including our business operations. Next slide, please, Kumsa. Just by way of background, we started this work in 2016 with the development of our initial framework. That framework laid out 4 key areas that we felt we could have the most impact in. One was social procurement. The second one was employment and local hiring. Infrastructure, and then community engagement, which really was the context through each of those areas of focus. We began implementing our framework in 2017 with our social procurement working group, and decided that social procurement was the best place to start. we grew that working group to develop a social procurement policy, which was passed by our Board of Governors in December of 2019. And that policy really was able to ground ourselves in embedding social procurement projects across our business practices. And we see that as having been very instrumental in furthering this work. We're also beginning work now on a more intentional local hiring strategy, and that work is really just beginning. So in my quick high-level overview, I'll just focus on our social procurement work and our local hiring strategy work. Next slide, please, Kumsa. So what we're doing in 2020, we started 2 pilot projects, and we too took the approach of a pilot approach to see what we could do, to test the waters, to see what was possible. And so we included social procurement in 2 of our builds that started in 2020. One was a School of Continuing Studies, and that's the building that's directly behind me, and our Markham campus. We've also included a few other projects with social procurement outcomes. One was a large washroom renewal project that we had, some building renovations, light installations, and moving services. So we've started to really look at other areas beyond just the big builds that we could involve social procurement outcomes. In terms of our building contracts, though, we felt we needed to integrate some of those social procurement outcomes from the get-go. We did, in our contracts, designate a certain amount of apprenticeships from the local community as well as equity deserving groups. York's Keele campus is located in the northwest of Toronto, directly beside the Jane and Finch community. And so we're very concerned around local community economic development, so wanted to make sure apprenticeships from the local community as well as equity deserving groups were included. We also designated X number of dollars per project that would be spent in local businesses and with social enterprises. And those numbers really varied on the size of the project. We didn't have a set formula. We really just kind of tried to figure out what seemed reasonable, what seemed doable. So to date, we've actually created 48 apprenticeship opportunities, which was higher than what we had targeted. We have 44 apprentices currently working across our projects. Those are women, youth, newcomers, visible minorities, as well as people from the local community, which we're tracking by postal code. We've spent over $2.6 million on local businesses and social enterprises to date, again, exceeding our targets, and these projects are yet to be completed. So we see a lot of promise in this practice. We've also been able to leverage some of our community networks to award social enterprise contracts, particularly during the pandemic. And some of those were A-Way Express, Out of the Box, and Eva's Print Shop. So again, looking at opportunities to expand beyond just the building contracts. Next slide, please. In terms of our social procurement work, I just want to highlight 4 things that we found that have been key for us. One is that really the construction and renovation projects really do afford us opportunities to embed social procurement in very concrete ways. Our community partners have continued to champion apprenticeships and local spending as 2 ways that we can make an impact. And we've also learned that the opportunities to grow our social procurement and community wealth building initiatives within social procurement services is untapped, and we are able to grow in that area. And then fourthly, we've found our leaders and staff on the whole to be very supportive of these initiatives and keen to be part of a community benefits movement and actualize what it really means to be considered an anchor institution in a community. Next slide, please. So where we're going with our social procurement work, we are in the final stages of a social procurement vendor portal that is imminently to be launched. That portal will be a database where we will be able to collect information on social enterprises and diverse businesses. And then that database will be accessible to buyers across our campus. And we've decided to make that an open access website so that the broader community can also access that portal. So I'll be happy to share that information yet this winter. The other thing that we're really doing is ensuring that our processes, or ensuring that we can refine our processes to make sure the proponents really know our values and understand our values and the anticipated outcomes that we want to see in these projects at the very get-go of the projects. We have been working on the creation of toolkits and webinars that are aimed at maximizing the social value and the understanding of that, so that proponents really from the very beginning know if they want to do business with us, this is what that means. Thirdly, we're continuing our community engagement to ensure that communities have a voice, and that as we move forward on projects, that is in collaboration with community, and that together we're really hoping to strengthen the social procurement ecosystem, realizing not one institution can do it, but it really takes all of us to keep pushing and working to move things forward. Next slide, please. So I'll just briefly touch on our employment work at this point. In true university style, we started with a research project in 2021. Our goal was to better understand the employment trajectory of employees from the local community, how they came to York, what that experience was, and how it could be built upon. We did a survey and virtual focus groups with employees of all employee groups at York, across postal areas in our local community. This project was done very much in collaboration with the Jane Finch Center through their Black Creek Fair Economies project, and was certainly a co-created and collaborated process. And we came out with 9 recommendations from that project. Next slide, please. Just very briefly, high level, those recommendations included creating a human resource local hiring policy. So really stating our intent and commitment. And you know, as we watched our social procurement work develop and the impact that having a social procurement policy made on you know, our internal ability to keep moving forward, it was felt that a local hiring policy would be an important step. We also, it was also recommended that the institution really develop an action plan and strategy to deal with the recommendations. And so those first 2 recommendations we are actually starting to work on for this year. So that's our work plan for this year, is to develop a work plan. The rest of the recommendations include setting targets for local inclusive hiring, to address barriers to hiring and career advancement at York, creating networking and mentorship opportunities, building community partners and pathways around employment to York, collecting and analyzing the data. And then finally, to align our local hiring strategy with the work that the institution is currently doing around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the strategy that's being developed there, as well as aligning it with our ongoing social procurement work. So that's really where we're at with the employment piece at this point. So those are my kind of formal comments at this point, and I look forward to talking with you all more. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Yeah, we're looking forward to a robust conversation with everyone. So yeah, keep your questions in mind. We're going to definitely try to get to your questions during this call as well. But first, let's go over to Andrew Arifuzaman for the last speaker. His bio reads, over the past 25 years, Andrew has held progressively senior leadership roles across the academic and health sectors in some of Canada's most prestigious organizations. Throughout his career, Andrew has led teams in a wide range of business disciplines, including operations, finance, marketing, and communications, information technology, research, partnerships, government. Sorry, just a minute. I lost my screen there for a little. Yeah, research, partnerships, government relations, capital development, and strategy. As Chief Administrative Officer at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, Andrew has spearheaded the development of the campus's strategic and master plans and brand strategy. He has also fostered partnerships across the public and private sectors that have brought together diverse groups and built innovative new programs and opportunities, including the creation of the Toronto Pan Am Sports Center. Andrew?
Thank you very much for that introduction, Rosemary, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I did want to just talk a little bit about where we are at UTSC, and there's so much overlap between what we've heard from the colleagues. First, I'll just start by this opening slide. Inspiring Inclusive Excellence is our new strategic plan at UTSC, and it's a commitment that we're making in everything that we're doing, from the academic programs to the business operations of the campus. That inclusive excellence is what our objective is. I did want to just start by a little bit of context around UTSC. UTSC is one of the 3 campuses of the University of Toronto system. And there's a lot of expansion that's going on. We have about 8 million square feet of development that we're undertaking over the next few decades. We've built about the first 1 million out. We're in construction now for the next 1 million. And the planning is underway for the 1 million square feet after that. So there's a lot of activities that are coming. And as my colleagues talked about, we're an anchor institution. We're place-based. We're here. We're stable. We're here for the long term. And there's an opportunity for us to help build our communities, not through charity, but actually through reciprocity. And so one of the key things that I'll circle back on several times is about reciprocity and what that actually means. But to set a little bit of the context, this is a map of what is now the city of Toronto from 1970. This line here indicates, this line here indicates Scarborough. Yellow represents middle income. So Scarborough was primarily in 1970 a middle income community. And then flash forward to 2000, you see that there's a lot more poverty that has expressed itself in Scarborough. And then if you go to 2012, almost all of Scarborough has transitioned from being middle income suburban community to having very low income pockets, with the exception of around the lakes. Now, we're one of the institutes in the region, and we partnered actually with a series of the other institutes in the region to actually create a consortium of anchor institutions where we're working very closely together to coordinate activities and to begin to try to build value and create a sense of community and investment in the local economy, as all of us are going through major redevelopment, in particular, creating construction jobs. The other key piece, and colleagues both spoke about this, engaging with our local communities and really hearing what their issues are, what their challenges are, and how we can begin to coordinate our actions to support these amazing community agencies that we have out here that are very much connected to the front line of what's happening within the region. Together, the anchor institutions, we've come up with this model where we want to create a place that thrives. And in order for that to do that, we have to have livable communities. We have to have meaningful work. We have to have a community that's engaged, and we want to be able to buy and invest in that community. So if we can procure things locally, it's much better for various reasons, including driving economic growth, including reduction in sustainability in terms of carbon footprint. And so we're really trying to work to create an opportunity to buy local. One of the challenges that we find, though, is that, you know, with all of us in the MUSH sector, we have broader public sector procurement guidelines, and we have to abide by those guidelines. So one of the challenges is, how do we get the small and small medium enterprises who may not have experience with the kind of bidding platforms? What are the opportunities that we can do there? So we've started training programs to help those small companies learn how to use a MERX, how to register and sign up for MERX so that they're actually aware of bids when bids come out to market, in addition to being able to do things like open houses and letting people know what our plans are. But one of the key things that we're working on, as I touched on earlier, is development. So we have a lot of projects that are actually in construction or about to go into construction. And we started some work about a decade ago to try to create opportunities for members of our local community to actually learn trades by taking pre-apprentice training programs and coming on site. And a key part that we've actually done is we've been partnered with the Hammerheads program, which we heard about earlier. But we've also partnered with some of our community agencies to kind of create the pathway, as well as other trade unions directly, to try to create opportunities for our projects to create apprenticeship opportunities for people from the neighborhood. One of the things that we know about construction projects is often they're all over the GTA, and if you don't have a car and you can't access public transit, because public transit in Scarborough is very poor, it's very difficult to get around. So if we can create jobs on our campus where somebody has a 2 or 3 kilometer commute versus a 40-kilometer commute, it's removing one of the barriers that community has to coming to work. And so we've really been focused on these kinds of partnerships. We've actually built in all of our procurement documents, the requirement for our general contractors to participate in this pre-apprenticeship program, and they have to develop an apprenticeship plan. Now, there is some burden on the developers for doing that and building that plan. So we work very closely together with them, and we'll often co-author letters to all the subcontractors, host meetings, talk to them about what the opportunities are, what our expectations of them are, hear from their concerns, and stay connected with all the sub-trades, because ultimately that's where the jobs are. It's not with the general contractors for the most part. But one of the things that we did identify early on, which surprised us, we thought that, well, we can create these wonderful jobs, and then we'll just let the community know that there's jobs available and connect them to the pre-apprentice programs. But really, one of the things that we identified is there's a lot of steps between identifying yourself as somebody who wants to be entering into the trades, for example, and actually getting a job on the site. And where we actually fell down a couple of times early on was we had sent individuals from our local communities to the trades to do a pre-apprentice training program, and the individuals just weren't ready. They weren't showing up. They weren't able to get there on time. There were constraints with the situation that they had at home. So we've been partnering with the East Scarborough storefront to really build this pathway program to identify somebody who's interested in the trades, and to systematically identify where there's challenges and issues or skills or supports that they need along this journey to get to the point where they can actually work on a job site. And this has actually been something that's been very, very valuable. And the success that we're starting to have is really shining through in terms of the construction projects that we are. And I guess this slide is a good representation of what you've heard from all of us today, that as anchor institutions, we're here for the long term and making commitments, but we really need to understand that there's a whole system that needs to evolve to really support the kind of community benefits objectives that we all hold, that it's not just the anchor institutions out of charity giving things. It's really about having an opportunity for the anchor institutions to be deliberate and clear about what their objectives are, and then ensuring that there's a pathway for people to be successful to get to the place where we want them to be, which is gainfully employed in well-paying and meaningful jobs. And so with that, some of the areas that we're working on now is, we've talked about employment. We're now looking at direct employment pathways to the university. So hiring people and partnering with community agencies to get people direct jobs as university employees. We're also looking at sales and resources, and how can the community do, what can the community do to produce goods that are needed by the anchor institutions. And a lot of the work that we're doing here is around food and local food supply, but we're also now moving into sustainable technologies with another partnership we have with all the Eastern GTA post-secondary institutions. I've touched on some of the real property and development opportunities that we have. And so now we're beginning to transition not only from building, but once the buildings are complete, transitioning people into operating those buildings. And we continue to anchor our activities around engagement with the community. And now we're looking at ways that we can integrate better with cultural, educational, economic, and health impacts for our local community. And so with that, I'm happy to sign off. And I think that's it for the presentation portion. I'll turn it back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to ask all the panelists to come back on video and let's have a conversation. We have 10 more minutes before 7 o'clock. We did say that we would spend up to 7:15 together, and that of course includes the concluding remarks. So if we need to, we have the time to be able to have this conversation. I am seeing a lot of good feedback in the chat. You know, people saying, you know, Nasser says it's the first time, his first COVID shot was at the West Park Healthcare Center. I know when I discovered the West Park Healthcare Center, for me, it was like a hidden gem, not too far from where I lived. You know, so it's amazing to see that these anchor institutions from, you know, the West Park Healthcare Center to the TTC to York University and to the University of Toronto, you know, taking this leadership. I mean, this is what leadership looks like, right? In our local communities. How do we make sure that the people who live in our local communities are connected to the work that we do, you know, can benefit from your place-based in that neighborhood. And so you found unique ways within your organizations to be able to make that leap. And, you know, I congratulate each and every one of you because I've seen firsthand some of the work that you're doing and the lives that it's changing. I think my first question to you, because you did answer a lot of the questions that I had in my head initially in getting this webinar started. My first question to you would be kind of, so you've done this now, but what are some of the systems change that you actually had to make internally to be able to be where you're at today? And was it worth it?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, jump in, Andrew. Jump in. Yeah, let's make this fluid.
I remember I was at a meeting several years ago, probably almost a decade ago, with the Atkinson Foundation held with all the procurement folks within the broader public sector in Toronto to start brainstorming about how some of this can happen. And the one thing that stuck out to me at that meeting was the number of times that people identified what the barriers were to changing policy, to doing this, to stepping out and doing something different. And it really struck me at that point that there was an opportunity that we didn't need to think necessarily about changing the whole system at once. What it needed was a bunch of people doing a little bit here and a little bit there, and then sharing how we've accomplished that. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to do on the campus, that we haven't, you know, we've taken maybe in total 50 apprentices over the course of the last 3 projects that we've taken on. But the point is that those 50 apprentices, I think there's 100% employment from those folks after they've left our jobs with the companies that they went to. And that's really meaningful change, right? And I think if everybody is taking some deliberate action and being clear about what they're doing, that changes the system, as opposed to, you know, the sort of policy level decisions where every ward will have this and every city councilor will have that and every municipality will have this. I think it takes the leadership from within organizations to say, okay, let's do what we can right now and see where that goes, and then share that as best practices.
I love that intentionality, you know, and having champions inside who's going to actually move this work. And you said the Atkinson Foundation as well. The Atkinson Foundation has been a catalyst for a lot of this work, and you know, from community benefits to social procurement to the anchor institution strategy. You know, they've really put their money where their mouth is to get, you know, to get a lot of this going, and to see that, you know, you guys have, you know, taken it up on yourself to, you know, to follow suit and, you know, to lead in your own ways. I mean, it's incredible. You know, I really loved what the West Park Healthcare Center did, which is the first healthcare center, like Shelley has said, to have a community benefits requirement. they started out by having a bold meeting with the contractors and the unions and the community and say, this is our commitment. Chesley, could you talk a little bit more about that? Was it worth it all? Do you see a path forward for your community benefits program?
Yeah, absolutely, Rosemary. I think you're right, and you were at one of the first meetings. It's bringing the stakeholders together and making sure everybody's clear and understand the objectives. I think that was the important thing, and not to be threatened by it. I think that's part of it. Is just how can we all contribute to this, ultimate goal. And Andrew, I think you said it. The general contractors, they generally understand this. They understand the concept. It's kind of that next layer with the subcontractors and having them more engaged. And actually, Rosemary was involved in a meeting with a few others just last week, where again we brought the subcontractors together. We brought Analyst on as the general contractor together, and West Park and TCBN and Hammerheads, and really just how can we engage and make sure that there are opportunities. I would also agree with what Andrew said in terms of system changes. Sometimes it's so huge, it seems insurmountable. So you've got to break it down. And I think that's been, to me, a big part of what we've done at West Park is really just trying to understand it. And the communication has been key. How do we do that? How do we reach out to the community? How do we make sure people are aware of who we are, where we are? Like, most people don't even know West Park, and it is that little gem, but there's such an opportunity. So we've really worked our way through that. And, overall, I would say it's been an exercise of building trust and those relationships. Yeah. So first amongst the stakeholders at hand, and then how do we build that within the community? So to me, that's been just a key part of what we've been doing.
Thank you, Chesley. And Lorna, talking about bureaucracy and communications internally and system change, when you started out, I'm not sure, I think I was probably involved with you. You called on me probably back in 2017 for some community-based consultation and such. And you were trying to move this within the bureaucracy of York University.
Yeah, you
what
remember
did
that.
What did it take? I do.
You remember that well, Rosemary. Yeah. So, I'll be honest, at the beginning, the word community benefits, terrified us. What does that mean? What kind of legal obligations are there? And so, we really had a struggle with that and move away from that kind of, that language in particular, and really picked up the anchor language. And the anchor language was much more successful for us, to be honest. And now we're able to talk about community benefits, and we're able to talk about the kinds of impacts that has on community, as well as the, the myriad of partnerships that we've developed as a result. So, it's not overnight work. And, we're seeing that particularly as we start to be more intentional about a local hiring strategy. And that's tough to really break down HR policies and practices and culture and biases and, but we keep pushing forward and can do so because of communities around the GTA that are doing similar things.
Yeah, you know what they say, a rose by any other name. At least now you're talking community benefits anyways.
Yeah, that's right.
And Chesley, the TTC has been, wily. We've been trying to talk with them for the longest time about a community benefits agreement, and they're not there yet. But to see that you're taking this bold and intentional step to diversify your workforce, that's incredible. And, TCBN and community benefits, we always talk about community benefits at all stages of the project. So we're pretty much also interested in the operations on these, major transit projects that we have seen built, the Eglinton Crosstown and the Finch West LRT, soon the Ontario line, et cetera, et cetera. We want to make sure that we're already starting to train and develop people who are going to be able to operate those transit lines.
And it's not even with these operator roles, for many of these roles, it's not even about training and developing. It's just making sure that they have their qualifications and their paperwork in place, and us creating a hard portal and pathway to get people their resumes to our recruitment folks and to our in the right way, right? Lorna, she touched on it that just right. This notion of community benefits is scary to people, right? Particularly in government, right? Like I came from the province. I could not say I couldn't even use CB, the initial CB in a document, right? Really and truly, it is a scary proposition for folks. And I think the TTC, it's not the scary, and the scariness is that they don't fully understand it. What are we getting into, right? What, to learn sports, like what are that, an agreement, this is a legal document. Like no way do you want to commit to that, right? And so the conversations that I've been able to have is more framing it around we've made a number of equity commitments. Our CEO is bullish on it, number one. Number two, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice to move towards equity. One, because of the licks we took for not being mindful of it. And now we're making commitments to move towards it. So positioning it from an equity position and from an equity framing is really, really important. We're bullish around it. It's just in time. Like you and I have had this conversation. I think that we can get to the agreement stage at some point, right? The city is also sort of working on pieces, and I know that TC likely want to wait and see what the city fully and properly puts in place to see how they fall in line. But it's bruising work, right? Like you lean against it, and when you lean against something, like any contact for it, you get bruised, right? But this isn't for folks in our community. Again, I grew up in Rexdale. I grew up in 910 Tandridge Crescent, right? My mother worked hard, right? She always wanted me to. She'd tell me drive a bus for the TTC. That's what she wanted me to do. This is the kind of job. These are good jobs, right? But to Andrew's point, there's also there are other types of systemic challenges that we have to figure out how to untangle as well, right? And so social systemic challenges that we'll have to untangle as well.
Thank you, Chesley. Now, we do have some questions in the chat, and I like the question, especially because, oftentimes we talk about workforce development as the main, outcome that can be had from a community benefits agreement. But here's a question that says, what are your thoughts on including climate change emissions, change reduction, and environmental sustainability as community benefits outcome? For example, we have 30-year transit projects. Should we match them with a 30-year tree policy, job creation, career growth policy, lifelong education policy? What are your thoughts around that? Can I start with Shelley? Because I know they've taken some real environmental commitments in building out the West Park Healthcare Center.
Absolutely. I was thrilled to see that question. Is it part of the community benefits agreement? No, not formally. However, from a West Park perspective, in terms of environmental sustainability, that just courses through our blood. I mean, that is part of our vision of who we are, our mission. So, we do it in a number of means and methods, I guess, just in terms of our facility itself and the new build. And, could there be more to be done? Absolutely. So there is a point to, how could we embed this in terms of requirements? But we've done that just in terms of greening health. We are part of the Mount Dennis community, which we all know has a, zero emission free, I'll call it that, in terms of their target. So we really respect that, and it carries through the culture of our organization. And we do it, whether it's, again, from how we operate, how we function, how we look at things, nature, even from, for those of you, again, who know where we are, we're 27 acres, and it was a lot of green space until we started construction. And our commitment is to replace that, because it is such a key element for us from a care perspective and health and wellness for our staff and our patients. So the idea or the notion of how could this be integrated, I think is a really good one and an important one, particularly within Toronto.
Thank you, Shelley. And Andrew, I see you also have a comment there.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Shelley's various two comments, and that is one of the things as anchor institutions, as place-based institutions, is we can bring new technology in, right? So often what we see in the development industry for a condo developer, they're not going to take a lot of risk with how they build something, whether materials are available, whether trades are available, but the kind of buildings that we all build, hospitals, universities, they're there for the long term, and how they operate. Like, we're taking a very long-term view in terms of carbon output and in terms of heating and cooling costs. All of those things factor into our business decisions. And so as we build, there's an opportunity, and we've done this where we've had things like passive house as a strategy for a building. Well, what it means is that we have to work with all the trades, and the trades have to learn how to build a passive house compliant building. And we're bringing new apprentices in as part of this community benefits language who are learning how to build passive house buildings, for example, which makes them better suited to take a job out on a condo developer, because we've been able to de-risk some of the kinds of sustainable technologies because we've built them and we've learned a lot of lessons. And we've trained the trades to do it. You know, similarly, as we're doing mass timber projects, well, there's going to be more and more mass timber, which goes a long way for carbon sequestration. And again, the condo developers are going to be the first one to build a massive mass timber project. But if we can build one, demonstrate it, validate prices and so forth, it makes it less expensive and de-risks it for the projects that come behind it. And so I think that's another really important role for anchor institutions, to be these sort of beacons of innovation and then we share our information. We'll publish papers on how our buildings function. That's the business that we're in, knowledge translation. So I think there's a real opportunity for people to see the kinds of work that we're doing as being a really important sustainable step as we go forward.
Thank you, Andrew. Chesley or Lorna, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I don't have a whole lot to add, again, and I'm new at the TTC, so it's really difficult for me to speak to all their pieces. Other than, it's really funny, I was listening into the board meeting today, which was riveting, right? That's sarcasm. But but again, one of the pieces that came really was around the TTC's commitment to decarbonizing our fleet, right? Again, I don't think it'll be a tomorrow thing, but it's part of a process. So this mindfulness of the role that we play in mitigating and reversing climate change is, I know it's a top priority at the TTC. How we're able to fully realize that, a little bit above my pay grade, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chesley.
And I'll just add real quickly, I really appreciate that question and that insight, because I think it's imperative that we continue to link sustainability and community benefits and the kind of work that we're doing. And so we do grapple with that at York, and we have our sustainability officer sitting on working groups to ensure that there's some cross collaboration there. And a new position that we've just hired in social procurement is titled Analyst for Social Procurement and Sustainability. So we're beginning more intentionally again to link those two things together. And I think there's lots of work we can do on that. And I think articulating those outcomes as community benefits as well will be really important in the future. So thank you for the question.
Okay, well, thank you. And so we, when we talk about targets, we usually talk about, the 10% of all trade or craft working hours. We're pretty much at a consensus point that we need to have some established targets for workforce development. But what about social procurement? Have any of your organizations taken any commitments that include specific targets over time for the kinds of social procurement that you can do from diverse owned companies and social enterprises? Do you think we should have targets there? Go ahead, Lorna.
Yeah, I really do think we do need targets there. We have put into practice, specifying a dollar amount that we want to see spent on local businesses and diverse owned businesses. Again, we're just kind of starting to touch that, but it's been very important to have a dollar figure with that, and one that we can track and one that we can say we've exceeded that outcome, and we've seen success there. So I think it's imperative to have those kind of
Well, thanks for your initiative in developing the social procurement portal. I'm sure everyone here is going to want to either have access to it or kind of understand some of your lessons learned from it when it's fully implemented. We don't have a lot of time left, and I do want to give the opportunity to Linda to come back on and to close the session because it's already 7:09. But like literally just 2 seconds each. Is there any last words that you would like to share with the audience? And let's start with Andrew, and then we'll go to Shelley, and then Lorna, and then Chesley.
Sure. I think one of the things that's really important, and I think Rosemary, you and your team have done it, is to convene groups where we can actually share best practices, right? We can share what each others are doing. And I think these kinds of forums, as much as it's really great for members of the community to hear, but the more, like, I ordinarily wouldn't come across Shelley in any other way. Lorna, I could come across because we're in the same sector, but certainly kind of creating those opportunities. And as Shelley's learning or has questions, she's more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'd give her whatever she would need or I could help. And so I think setting tables like this are really important for us to share, because we don't know where we're going to end up. We just know that we're all on a journey together. And as long as we're helping each other on that journey, I think we'll be far more successful than if we're just a bunch of individuals looking for the system to change to help us out.
That's amazing. Thank you. Shelley, what do you have to say about that?
Well, Andrew, I've got your name and Lorna's name written here right beside me, and I'm going to call you really soon because you gave some excellent examples. And I think it's important that we do learn from each other. It's such an important initiative, and we're all at different stages. And if we don't have this dialogue and this conversation, we're never going to move forward. So to me, that's key. And I think, from a West Park perspective, probably our biggest challenge is just how do we get out there? How do we get to the community? How are they aware? And, we've struggled with social procurement. I will tell you that we talk about it all the time, and we just struggle on how do we get that next step. And for us, it goes also beyond just the construction project. We're a hospital, we're expanding, we need people today, and we're going to need people when we're open and beyond. So again, how do we create those opportunities, identify the gaps, and then certainly explore those opportunities and promote them as best we can. So to me, this has been a great session.
Awesome, Shelley, let's do it again. Lorna?
Very similar theme. And I would say just that, that we continue to build a larger ecosystem around these, around community benefits, and that we need to support each other, and successes that we have at one little system, we've got to share with each other. This is not about the institution, it's about the system.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chesley.
3 things. One, again, to Andrew's point, is the forum and the opportunity to collaborate. Like at the TTC, conversations around procurement generally and social procurement equity and social procurement, we're just in the beginning of. And being able to look to folks on this panel that support us to deepen those conversations toward from words to move to actions is exciting. Number 1. So I'll say that. Number 2. If you are a woman and you live in the city of Toronto and you have a driver's license, a clean abstract, and your high school equivalency, apply to the TTC. Go on our website, operator recruitment, apply to the TTC, said Chesley sent you. If you live in a neighborhood improvement area, if you have a friend or colleague or son or daughter or brother or sister, what have you, they have a clean driver's abstract, a driver's license, and a high school equivalency, tell them Chesley sent you, apply for an operator role at the TTC. The last thing I'll say is if my life biography is ever on the OWN network, I want Linda J. Peak to narrate my life, please.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you all very much, our wonderful panelists, and we hope to do this again. So this is our last session of the webinar, and for now, see you again within the next several months. Okay, Linda, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Rosemary. I think what the panel reinforced for me is that it takes political will and working together and a lot of hard work to put ideas about community benefits into practice. Both Rosemary and Chesley, in their opening remarks, made reference to local and national racist events and practices that punctured the public consciousness. And I think that that's created a conjuncture where the political spaces really have started to open up for consideration of equity and diversity and inclusion. And I'm talking about equity, diversity and inclusion, not just as mere add-ons once a project's been decided upon, but as markers of excellence that need to be threaded through projects from start to finish, from bottom to top. And anchor institutions, as Andrew reminded us, are place-based institutions and are thus very well situated to do this with their detailed knowledge of local communities, their intellectual and material resources and leadership, their technological inventiveness, and their capacity to build long-term partnerships. But as all the speakers reminded us, going from recognition to planning to implementation is not easy or straightforward. As Shelley and Lorna stated, it requires trust and communication. It requires cutting through bureaucratic cultures and logics, and it requires political commitment from the top to make it happen. And as Chesley said, it's bruising work. But as he also said, and I concur, we don't really have a choice. Because the world as we knew it is no longer able to provide us with a blueprint for how to go forward. But if we want to build sustainable and inclusive workplaces and cities, then we need to make sure that community benefits take place. And we need organizations such as the Toronto Community Benefits Network and leaders like Rosemary Powell to provide opportunities to bring us together and to take us forward. So thank you very much to everyone on the panel. And let me conclude by saying thank you as well to all our partners who've made this possible. The Atkinson Foundation, the Canadian Urban Institute, York's City Institute, the University of Toronto School of Cities, and the university formerly known as Ryerson City Building Centre. Thanks to our speakers for your thoughts and insights and passion in how to build an inclusive society and an economy. Thank you to Rosemary Powell and the Toronto Community Benefits Network for your facilitation and for inspiring the series. And thanks also to Joe Mihevich, who's not with us tonight, but helped in putting this session together. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you to everyone who I cannot see, but I know that you are there, for attending and for your questions and comments. And I sincerely hope that this has been a helpful session for you, and that it's clear why we should all be supporting the TCBN in all ways possible. Thank you.